Warning. The following contains bright, flashing lights and /or imagery that may cause discomfort and /or seizures for those with photosensitive epilepsy. Viewer discretion is advised.
Awesome. We are back. This is season 2 now. We're slowly recovering from the post-December thing. We had a break, and all of us are like, a little jet-lagged on my end. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I am alive, figuring things out. 2003 has started off with a bang, in a lot of ways. Globally, I think we're in for a few other once-in-a-lifetime things this year, probably. But it's interesting seeing how things are, going back to. I wouldn't say going back to normal.
The new normal.
They're settling into the new normal, right? But before we go into all that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where do you hail from?
I'm from St. Louis, so I'm from the center of the country, a very Midwestern place. St. Louis is the murder capital of the United States per capita, small city, tons of violence. I grew up a little bit west of the city, which is a better option for survival.
Yeah.
Went into the Marines, so not too far away.
What motivated you into going into the Marines?
I liked traveling. I liked shooting.
Escape.
Probably escape, but more seeking
path?
adventure. I think less escape, more just seeking out something that was bigger and better and cooler and different than what I had.
And why specifically the Marines?
Because they did all the cool shit that I really liked and respected. Literally, they had the best fitness standards in the world. They had the best shooting standards in the world. At the time, they were the best snipers. All the cool stuff at the time was from those guys. And you didn't hear a whole lot about them, unlike what you hear about now with special forces and SEALs and all that other stuff. So
that's where
very
you
attractive,
went. Yeah. What did you settle in when you worked? Like, what activities were you doing?
Well, that's the interesting part, is that I ended up having a less structured experience in the Marine Corps. So my primary job was a rifleman. And then when you get to a certain level, so you have private and private first class and lance corporal and sergeant. When you get above that, a staff sergeant, you go to an MOS. It's just a generic MOS. So it's like a small unit leader is what they call it. But I spent very little time doing that. I spent a lot of time in what they call billets or secondary jobs. And it would be like going out and doing recruiting, or going out and working at an intel center, or going out and working at a motion picture laser. So I had all these weird, very strange jobs that I spent more time with civilians and weird functions than I did with the actual infantry side of things.
Yeah. And basically learning different tradecraft skill sets and life lessons, basically, in the military, but on the fringes of it, basically. The weird.
Absolutely. Much broader exposure. Otherwise, I would have just stayed in the field with a rifle, humping a pack, going from point A to point B, doing a thing and going back. And it was very little of that.
Did you have a path already selected for yourself, or you were just winging it, going into the military and figuring it out?
The weird thing is that the military has everything, literally. So any type of job you could want to do exists in the military. And then within that are all kinds of little odd jobs, little liaison jobs that, just for an example, I ended up finding out about this job in LA where I could go out there, work out of an office, edit scripts for Hollywood, and then go on set and teach actors how to walk and talk like Marines, or how to do, let's say, clear a stairwell, right? So they call it a ladder well. So this is how you clear the ladder well. This is what our TTPs are. This is how you would actually do it. And then the director or producer says, "Oh, that looks sexy. I like it. We'll use it." Or, you know what? That's not sexy. We're not going to do that. But I would get paid as a young guy to go out on the set of, for example, The Bourne Identity. I'm going to fly you to Prague. We're going to put you here in this nice hotel, and then you're going to go over there and tell Matt Damon all this stuff, and you're going to get these guys from the actual embassy, real Marine security guards, bring them in and tell them how you want them to do it in conjunction with the director. So very weird, very odd job. Nobody even know it exists.
Yeah. So when you find yourself there, this weird job where you're showing these people how to move around with rifles in this building, and Matt Damon's there. That's a weird moment.
Well, it is. It's odd because one, the people that you're there supporting don't necessarily support you.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand the politics of it. I was young.
Yeah.
So you're not really involved in that aspect of it. And so it was odd there. And then the external support, but then internally them, counterproductively working against you. It was weird. So it's very valuable from an experience standpoint, to get that exposure.
Yeah, the travel aspect of it, which later on in your life was, interesting as far as being exposed to that. What else did you do there in the Marines?
I worked out of another weird office that was a liaison to Quantico with FBI and DEA that essentially took background information on people. So if you served in the military in the U.S., your records would go to this location, and then they would, if you had classified records, for example, go into this room in this SCIF, and basically you would take the information out to get a profile on a person. So I say, okay, well, Ed went to this training, he went to SEER training, and then he went to this training and that training and all this stuff. And then they would take it, put it together, do a profile, send it out to Quantico if it was FBI or DEA, or if it's the military, like even Marine Corps is on Quantico as well. So they'd send that out. So that was another crazy experience because you're dealing with guys who you really respected, and then you're going back in their records and looking at stuff and posting like, "Ooh, that was not good."
Yeah, that's weird access.
Yeah,
access, and
it wasn't earned. It was through learning what was there, and I was at the time fighting in MMA, which was called No Holds Barred NHB.
And what year is this?
This is mid '90s. You're talking about '96 time frame.
Wow, this is the kind of the inceptions of it, right?
Yeah. So the job allowed me to stay where my team was because the facility was there, and it was kind of unlike most Marine jobs, especially in the infantry, it was kind of a 9 to 5, or in this case 74. So I could do both. So I had a little balancing act, which doesn't happen much in the military.
So you started when you were in the military. That's when you started. You were seriously focusing on MMA and fighting. What did you see that pull you in as far as fighting?
Well, I was doing karate and Japanese Jiu Jitsu. And
for people that don't know the differences, that just hear Jiu Jitsu and Japanese and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah, they're all connected, but very different at the same time.
What's the main difference between Japanese Jiu Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?
So Japanese Jiu Jitsu focuses a lot on wrist locks, joint locks, manipulation, stuff like that, and it's predominantly standing. Right? There's a ground component, but it's limited. Whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the opposite. The focus is on the ground. So there are standing techniques, which are takedowns and throws and things like that, but 90+% is groundwork, right? And so it's kind of the inverse of traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
So you have this Japanese Jiu-Jitsu karate background, and what do you see that makes you?
Well, that's another kind of weird term because I was teaching karate and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and I was on recruiting duty in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And next to the recruiting office opened up this little gym, a martial arts gym, and it was a guy from Brazil. And this is just after Hoist Gracie started winning in the 90s. And my coach, who was an old Marine and old cop, said, I've taught you most of the stuff that I have to teach. Why don't you go check them out? And if it's good, bring it back to us so that we have that in our system. And I went over there and expected to kick the shit out of everybody in the room, which normally would happen.
Yeah.
And I got tooled up by like a 16-year-old kid that was 150 pounds, just completely freaking jacked me up. And
What did he do? What was the surprising moment? What did he do to you?
I was used to grappling. I got a takedown on him. And when we hit the ground, he put me in a triangle, which is a choke with the legs, right? So we hit the ground, and all of a sudden, before I knew it, like this, I can't get out of this weird position, right? I've never seen people fighting off their back before at the time that this happened. And this kid who, you know, I'm not a big guy, I'm small, but this kid was probably 20 pounds, 30 pounds lighter than me and probably 10 years younger than me. And he just looked like a clown. Like I couldn't reconcile how this kid just tooled me up. And as we hit the ground, I couldn't get out of his legs. He locked it in and I couldn't get out, and I didn't know the move. So I had no way of...
He was just there.
Yeah, I had no way of understanding what was happening to me. So I thought, okay, that was a fluke, right? Sometimes in fighting, flukes happen. People get knocked out, and they shouldn't have been knocked out. You know, if you look at it in terms of scoring, you say, okay, well, that guy was, you know, losing the entire fight, and he got knocked out. So I thought it was a fluke. And so we went again. So in jiu-jitsu, you tap hands and bump fist, and you start again. And sure as shit, the exact same move a second time in a row. And then I got tooled up with some other stuff I don't even remember. But I remember 2 triangles in a row, and then going with a bunch of other guys. And I was head fucked at that time. Mentally, I couldn't process what occurred. And so when I left, I literally was beside myself. Because not only did I not win any of the fights in there, but I didn't understand what had happened. And it literally was like neutering you. Like, that's it.
So a lot of people will stop themselves there and not go any further.
That was the norm actually at our gym. And at the time I didn't understand. And it was very hard to come back in the second time because you're like, I'm a man. But rationally say, okay, if you want to beat that, you have to learn that. And then maybe you take some of that magic and you can apply it to other people. So you got to do that. So it was extremely hard to keep coming back and taking those ass whoopings for the first couple of months.
How did you do?
I hated going through the doors, but I knew that was the medicine, right? I knew that was the solution to the problem. I didn't like it. Yeah. And it probably took 3 months before I could start really actively defending against decent guys, and 6 months until I was applying that to them.
Yeah.
And then after that, it just...
and this is the early stages of that kind of being out.
Very early.
There's no material. There's no going on YouTube and seeing...
There wasn't a YouTube.
The history of it is what people say and VHS videos. And
VHS. So that was the next step. The next step was to get the Gracie's in Action VHS tape and watch that and study that. And look at what they were
for people that didn't live through that, what? How did you even get that? Was it a back? Hey, somebody at the gym has a bunch of VHSs.
I realize how crazy this is in the moment to say this, but you had to get a magazine, and then you'd either submit it, meaning you'd cut out a little thing and then submit it with a credit card number or whatever you had to pay with it, or you'd call a number. So Black Belt Magazine was the common one that was selling these VHS tapes. Yeah. And then, you give them your information, credit card number, whatever it is, and then they send it to you in, 4 weeks or whatever the norm was, and then you get this nice little box, and and I can't remember who it was, something like Panther Productions or whatever producer that was, and then you'd watch it, and there was no immediate feedback until I got with an instructor, and my instructor was a black belt under Rickson Gracie. So for anybody that knows the lineage of jiu-jitsu, Rickson was the family champion forever.
He was the guy.
Yeah,
he was the guy. You saw these videos of this alien material from another country, and you're like, it's clicking in your head as far as
it wasn't clicking in my head. That's the problem.
It's like you don't know what was going on in that screen.
Yeah, so when you watch it and you see these things, you can say, okay, he's doing this. That's a mechanical movement, and I understand the mechanical movement, but when you go to apply it with resistance, it doesn't work out the same. Yeah. And so all these little nuances had to be put into place to prevent them from being able to resist, at least successfully.
Yeah. So you get exposed to this weird new jiu-jitsu.
Magic.
Black magic on the ground and all this stuff. You see it as this is I need to master this.
There was no doubt. I mean, it literally just smashed my game, my style, and I could take that style all over the place and beat everyone, and then all of a sudden I can do nothing. The style was completely useless.
Yeah. This moment in time. I remember, at least in Mexico, we would get these. We had video stores. In the video stores, we got the first UFC fights, and we would put them on. Back when everybody was wearing their old uniforms, the guy with a single boxing glove.
Oh yeah.
the Savate guy. I don't think it was a kickboxer or a Savate guy, French guy,
Yep.
beating the shit out of the sumo wrestler, with his fucking wooden legs, and just seeing all of our childhood delusions of watching Bruce Lee and Van Damme, all that just melting away, and also just a lot of us were invested in like an art of some sort, and like, we probably, and then all of a sudden you see this guy walk in there, skinny guy, with a gi on, like, what the hell is this guy doing with this gi on? It just murders everybody there. That changed the fundamental kind of like a zeitgeist, the general zeitgeist of what works or what doesn't work in a fight. That kind of changed things. Now, most people in that period, I mean, there wasn't a UFC back then. So you when you were training that, like, what was your intention? I'm just going to be more proficient, dangerous person to strangle people?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've committed a ton of time and energy and passion to this art, this thing, this style. And I was really focused on reality. I wasn't focused on the katas and that kind of stuff. I was focused on actual fighting. And I used it on a regular basis. I couldn't reconcile, how could this get taken apart? How is it so effective all over the place, whether it's in a gym or on the street? And this little technique, these little modifications, all of a sudden just took it apart. And very, very difficult to process. And until you do that thing and you see how it works, almost everybody has the same story, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
Coming into a jiu-jitsu gym, almost everybody.
Yeah.
If it's a D1 national champion wrestler, maybe their experience is a little different. But for normal people, it's the same experience.
It's like walking into quicksand is my experience with it. Like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is solid grunt.
Yeah, I mean, it gets explained to a lot of people as a feeling of drowning, of suffocating.
Yeah,
and it's that, exactly that.
Yeah. So you're doing this while you're going through your military career.
Yeah, still in the Marine Corps and then actively fighting. And at the time,
and when you say actively fighting, I mean, are you involved in these the first versions of these? Like, what are those like?
Yeah, so in where I was in Missouri. It was illegal, as it was in almost every state, which is why they would do it on reservations, right? They would take these Native American reservations and they would have casinos and other places and they'd host the fights. So it was not looked at as anything respectable. So it wasn't like
when you say it was illegal, I mean, it wasn't allowed to happen.
Correct.
But participating in it
was illegal.
Okay.
At the time, right? So you couldn't do this. So it was closed door stuff.
Yeah. And when you say closed door, I mean, how big were the crowds?
They weren't that big initially, right? So initially, the first few fights that I did, we might have 50 to 100 people in a room, and they did happen on mats. A lot of them were happening on concrete and stuff. But
there's no cages.
There's no nothing. There's no ring. There's no cage. There's no nothing. Just
mats,
a room with mats and then
gentlemanly agreement between two guys. And
yeah, they were pulling fighters from all over, and we didn't have set weight classes so you could fight whoever, and we were very one-dimensional in terms of styles. So it would be like a jiu-jitsu guy fighting a boxer, or it would be a jiu-jitsu guy fighting a wrestler, or it was one style against another one, like almost purist in form. So you could see how that particular thing fared with another style.
Yeah.
Unlike now where everybody's hybrid. Yeah. Everybody's doing everything.
Everybody's beige. Everybody's beige.
That's what it is.
It's an interesting time to kind of like be like witness, and also just participating actively in.
It's blown up. It's nothing like that. And so when we were doing this, people would look at it and be like, "What is that?" So is that karate, or is it wrestling, or what is it? And you couldn't define it. You couldn't really.
What's the equipment like?
At the time,
we
had mouthpieces and groin cups, and so
nothing on your hands.
No, in the beginning we had nothing on our hands, and then eventually it went to 4-ounce gloves, maybe a couple of years in.
So basically, you were bare knuckle.
Yeah, it was, and everybody knew at the time that if you had no gloves on, it was actually more dangerous for the puncher.
Your hands are going to break.
Yeah, so you can headshot.
We had a guy, Necio, here, who's a bare knuckle boxer, and he just came from after a fight, and the first thing I noticed on him is his hands are.
I mean, those bones are so small and the head is so hard.
Yeah.
And even if, like, you were talking to me about Leth Way, when they put their head down, they tuck their chin like that, and you hit high on the head with your fist.
It's like
It's
hitting
not
a
good.
wall. Yeah. So the minimal equipment, cups, mouthpieces, mats on the ground, 50 people screaming, and alcohol, I imagine, the entertainment of some sort.
Interesting.
Or was
the
it
first
more?
couple? No, the first couple didn't have it. So it was like the fighters could bring like 3 or 4 of their friends, and they would charge them like $100 or something. And it wasn't that drinking. It wasn't that vibe. It was very quiet, very, very quiet.
Very like fight nerds. Would it be like a thing?
Some-
Like people
some
that
of
were
them
interested
were.
are like, look at this, or the oddity aspect, the carnival aspect.
I think the oddity, like people didn't understand what it was, and people were kind of trying to figure it out as they watched it. And it was a couple of years later. So in the early days, like one of the first formed ones was called the Universal Challenge. And in that, people were sitting on mats, kind of just sitting in a circle watching this unfold. They were very, very quiet, very respectful. Cut to 2 or 3 years later, this guy, Brian Madden in the Midwest, started putting on this thing called the Submission Fighting Championships. And then you get into putting it in a ring, you get into 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people, and people drunk, people screaming, kick his fucking ass. Like, okay.
Cockfight.
Then it's a human cockfight. In fact, that's actually what was called at the time by a lot of people. Like, oh, that's human cockfighting. They didn't see or respect the strategy, with the exception of the Brazilians and the Japanese. And the Japanese revered fighters. So anytime that we were in Japan, you got an immense amount of respect.
Yeah.
You know?
Did you get the whole brawler individuals showing up as well?
Yeah, and I think people know those guys are good for entertainment. Those guys are good for the moneymakers. So they respect that. They're not the best in terms of technique. They're not the best in terms of strategies, and they're not the best fighters. Yeah. But they bring the crowds, right? Yeah. People want to see that. They want to see
conflict.
Violence. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're there at the beginning of it. Now, where does that leave your career?
That's a great question.
Are you showing up at work with marks on you? Are they worried about your?
Yeah, a little bit of that is going on. So officially, the Marine Corps could not support me because it was against Marine Corps regulations. But I had a great boss. So I was enlisted, and my boss was an officer. And usually, that's not the best of relationships in general. If you talk to guys, I had this. A guy who was a chief warrant officer, CBO3. His name was Frank Wood. And anyway, long story short, he supported me. He's like, I love what you're doing. It's great. Keep doing it. So I would show up with shiners and, teeth knocked out and injuries and stuff like that. And what ended up happening is guys would start coming, recruiters, with a pull-up bar, and they do a pull-up challenge at the events. And they see that guy there? That's Todd Fox. He's a Marine. He's active duty Marine. He's doing this and that. And they would utilize it to leverage what it was they were doing, which was putting bodies in the Marine Corps. So even though officially I wasn't supposed to be doing it, it was happening. And they supported it indirectly by showing up. And, obviously Marines love that shit. Yeah. So it was a weird kind of thing where it said, you can't do that.
But yeah. So you're pursuing. So you're pursuing the side quest of basically trying to figure out how to get the better of people in a ring. Well, before there was a ring, this is unsustainable. It seems like on both, basically burning on both ends, I guess.
Yeah, but the thing is, no one knew. So like what you know today, when you're looking at it in hindsight, what this monster has become. Like no one knew where it could go or what it was going to be, and there was really no money in it. So you did it for the passion of it.
It's an interesting question. How much for a fight back then?
Well, in the beginning, it was if you win, you get paid, right? And it's a few $100, so it's not really worth it because a hospital visit is going to cost you thousands of dollars, even back then. Yeah. And then as it progressed, like the one I mentioned, SFC, that one was a few thousand. But the way the promoters did it was they said, okay, we'll give you $1,000 to fight, and then we're going to give you however many tickets you want, and you'll get a percentage of it. So that gave you an incentive to go out and sell tickets, right? To promote your own fight. So, but you could make some money on the back end, and if you did it right, you make $3,000 or $4,000. And that was in the mid '90s. So that was for us, for young guys who were doing something that they were passionate about. That was a revenue stream that was considerable. Yeah.
What happens? And something has to change. Something has to give.
Well, in my case, it was an offer that I got while I was doing it. So I had moved out to LA to be in the motion picture liaison. I was still training, still fighting, still competing. And as I was teaching, a guy came in to start training with us. And at the time, Hickson was a great MMA fighter, but we didn't have a lot of MMA guys. In fact, I was the only guy that was actively doing it at that time. And a guy came in from the UK, and he was taking privates. And we had famous people, directors, actors, producers come in all the time. And it was in a place called Pacific Palisades, and he'd come in and train. And eventually he had asked if I would work with him. And the reason he picked me is not because of the jiu-jitsu, it was because I had the MMA experience. And so he wanted to kind of focus on more of the reality-based stuff. So in that, he eventually said, hey, I want you to come meet my girlfriend or fiance, whatever she was at the time, in Beverly Hills. You know, we got this thing. There's a proposition we want to make you. And I was still in the Marine Corps. So if you know what service alphas are, they're these green uniforms that they wear. And I was in service alphas. I went to the location that he gave me. And when I got there, his fiance was Madonna. And it was Guy Ritchie. Guy loved training, hardcore about it. And he wanted me to basically be with him to train him when she went out on tour.
So basically you wanted like you hang out, private trainer, to show me how to be better at this.
Yeah, so she needed another security guy, and he wanted somebody that was a jiu-jitsu guy. So it worked out perfect in his mind, and he was right. It was great because I could do security, but then when he wanted to pull me, he could pull me from the detail, and we could train.
Yeah,
and that's it. And so we did that.
When they asked you to be security, like, what's your security experience at this point?
Actually, it's down here. It's down here in Mexico. Yeah, so this could go a lot of different paths. But so another thing that I wasn't cleared to do was to go work protective details. But speaking Spanish and being used to this area, I would get guys who would ask me to take them to certain places. So in the Hollywood area, you have these guys coming down here to vacation and do business deals. And so I would come down as an assistant, as a security guy, as a translator, as whatever. And I would come down with them. And eventually what happened is a group of fishermen started fishing down in Sinaloa. There's a lake called Bacharach, and it has the largest largemouth bass in North America.
Great
Massive
fishing.
Monsters.
Great fishing.
Have you been there?
Yeah.
The place is crazy. So they started going, and they kind of realized what was going on in the area, and I got called to basically accompany them, be security for them. So, you know, you'd go from wherever you're going, you'd fly into Los Mochis, and then you drive from Mochis down to Wasabe, and then you go from Wasabe into the mountains, somewhere between basically Culiacan and Los Mochis, but up in the mountains. And it's desolate area. And obviously all the traffickers are in that area. They own that area. They control that area.
Walking around with a gun in there.
Everybody. I mean, it's just known, it's understood, and that's where the revenue source is. So they brought me down there to do that. And so I would start to do site surveys and advances, and I build relationships in the community.
Where are you getting these skills to do site surveys and advances? Like, where does that come from?
Well, I got those skills partially in the Marine Corps. And then I went to other organizations to get
But you're doing that, basically gaining the experience.
Yeah, well, the real experience came from, so these fishermen lived in a compound when they were down there, right? So the little village is called Bacubirito because there are vacas and burros. Bacubirito is it, and then Bacurato is the really small village on the lake. So they'd come down and they'd put them in a compound because all these guys are rich white guys. So I jumped the fence and made relationships in the community, talking to people. As you know, I start to learn about their art. I start to learn about their music. I start to learn about what they eat, and that paid dividends. And of everything that I ever learned in protection, that is the number one skill, cultural penetration, and just through conversations.
Yeah. And
I'd go somewhere and, like, let's say Los Tigres del Norte, big band in Mexico, right? Especially in that area. And they had a song, Yo soy de San Luis Potosí. So I learned the song because I'm from San Luis. Yeah. And so I started learning the song. And in Missouri, there's a city called Potosi. Yeah. And then you start learning that. And then you have this other thing to connect on. And then you start learning another thing. And then now all of a sudden, I'm going into the little abarrotes and getting, cacahuate japonés. And, you start to develop these skills. And then now this guy's going to help you. And, just as we talked about as I came in here, across the street is a boxing gym that a friend of a friend runs, a guy I know down here who was a champ. And all of a sudden you have these networks of people. And they're not connected to anything in particular, so they're not going to pin it to you. It's like...
So for a lot of people that view security, they view it as quiet guy with sunglasses standing like a statue, but they don't realize that a lot of the work that is actually quality work is going out there, forming relationships, bartering, gift giving, cultural immersion, language. Like when I would do things of that nature, I would wear the local soccer jersey everywhere, like depending on where I was,
Absolutely.
and I would learn and memorize everything I can about the last few games, and that allowed me to kind of like open conversations with people.
Absolutely. That's the crux of it. Those human relationships are what are going to keep you safe and or put you in harm's way.
And that's a pretty interesting university. You know, that's a pretty interesting university for that.
You know, so something further happened. Some of the fishermen that I was with were really good men, and they saw the poverty, because that's another level of poverty, right? So here you have poverty, but there it's completely different. So there's almost nothing. And they saw it and said, hey, you know, do you guys want to throw in some money? And we'll start buying some stuff. And so we bought some stuff for them and distributed around the town. And then they would go back 2 to 3 times a year for fishing. And the same kind of core guys would go back each trip, but then they'd bring other businessmen. And eventually what happened is we were bringing stuff from the U.S. And what we found that, you know, we'd bring U.S. gear in that was old or used or whatever. It didn't make sense, because then they were trying to hit us on the ingress and tariffs and all this other stuff. Didn't make sense. So we said, okay, we're going to buy it there. So we would go to like Leh and go to Leh and buy in bulk. So you'd buy beans in bulk and rice in bulk and flour in bulk, maseca in bulk. And then when they're there, every time these guys would come in, the people would be happy to see them, because they'd come around and they'd give away these sacks, a kilo sack of this, a kilo sack of that, or whatever, and they're taking care of the people. So they developed relationships that way. And eventually some of the guys would also jump the fence with me at night and hang out with the people, have drinks and talk to them, and they'd know them by name, and they'd play soccer with the kids. And so this charity lasted for 20 years, you know, and it was 3 to 4 times a year. So
It's awesome.
yeah, and it's great for information. A lot of these kids that were in the middle of nowhere ended up moving like to Mexico City, and then from there into the States. And you know, these guys have grown up very successful. And to maintain that network and that relationship for 20 plus years out of a little tiny fishing village in Sinaloa, that's massive.
So you find yourself in a room with Madonna, Guy Ritchie, with that kind of in your, well, that and amongst other things. The offer is to provide security in tandem with also training with this guy that's really into just fighting. So note to people that want to start shit with Guy Ritchie, I guess, you know.
Guys, for real. He had a karate background and a judo background when he started with me, and he went 100% all the time. He didn't ask to go light, like celebrity style training.
Yeah.
He had some grit to him, and I'm sure he still does to this day.
Yeah. What was so that's like your first foray into this
Entertainment.
Entertainment security aspect of it, which is, I don't know, I've seen the periphery of it, and I know people like Ryan that do some of that. But that's a different complicated, complex type of setting, right?
Yeah. So entertainment is based on emotion, and it's not based on reality. So it's emotion and it's a show. And I came from a world that was based on logic and reason and reality.
Yeah.
And there were serious consequences if you were wrong or you didn't apply certain strategies or ideologies. And so entering into that realm was another wake up, right? Because just like jiu-jitsu, you know, going into jiu-jitsu and just getting smoked, same thing. So they operated in a very different way, without logic, without reason, with emotion, and everything is about the show. It's all theater all the time. And so that took me probably at least as long as jiu-jitsu to acclimate to.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, when you say emotion, I mean, your client, I want to go here, but I don't want you around me. But this is a bad place. I should be really specifically really close by. No, visuals. That is that type of situation.
That, but just everything. Everything was based on an emotion. So the beauty of what those people produce, right, is that emotion. The problem is that it's fleeting, it's temporary, it's not something I can build a plan on, and it's in the moment, right? The result is amazing. When you look at music and you look at film or you look at art, they're phenomenal at what they do. but they live in a different reality in their head, and they live in a different reality in the world. And so trying to make plans and organize and structure
around it. It's like
they hate structure. And so you're brought in to do a specific thing. And on one end of structure is like you build a cell around them, right? And a big fortress around them. And that's, really serious security. And at the other end is no security, nothing at all. And so trying to find a compromise was the challenge. And then how you presented it to them was everything. And that's the takeaway for me is I have to frame it in a way that they can understand it, they can process it, and it leads them down the path to make the best choice for them. Not for me, but for them.
One of my mentors when it comes to security, like I did some security work myself. He used to tell me that a good head of security is an educator. And what do you mean an educator? You have to explain your job to your client in such a way where they can understand it, accept it, and also learn from it. And if you do that, it makes your job a little bit easier. And this is for politicians, and I did work for that for a few politicians, not celebrities. I imagine it's a whole different ballgame. But
completely.
Basically explaining your actions or what is going to happen to somebody who is about emotions and about living in the moment or being creative. It's like I can imagine that would be like so you have to basically figure out that structure.
It's not just figuring out. You have to first learn how they think. You learn how they think. You learn how they operate. You learn what drives it, like what created this thing. And it can be an incident or a series of incidents in their childhood, and you start to figure that out. And then you start to see things through their lens. And then you click back, toggle over to reality, and say, how do I blend these two worlds so that the outcome is the best possible outcome for them, not just me. But
so there's compromises on both ends, basically. Like on your end, you have to be willing to forgo certain things if that is...
Adjusting on the fly is a big part of what we do. Getting information at the last minute or a change of plans. Like you spend a week advancing something, sorting it out in a high-risk area, and then they can have a feeling and decide that's not happening. They're going somewhere else or doing something else.
And that's an interesting aspect. You're also it's also emotions are part of it, but intuition, like their intuition is like a factor that is it's a complete wild card.
Yeah, and there are a lot of factors in that intuition, right? And so intuition is huge in protection. I believe in it, and it's kept me out of some really bad spots.
For people that want to attach supernatural, what is intuition to you?
Well, it's a feeling that you can't describe, and it maybe isn't purely emotional, it isn't purely logical, and it's just this overwhelming sense of something.
I describe it as a realization that your brain hasn't been able to come up words for. So when you have internal realization of something, but your brain hasn't been able to put it into words for yourself.
Yeah, and it's really worked well for me, especially in really tight spots.
And this is a pretty high level gig to start off in. When I say high level, I mean it's not the easiest first one.
Yeah, in terms of profile, it's as high a profile as you get.
This is in late 90s.
It was around 99, 2000. Yeah.
Both of them are.
Yeah. It was definitely Guy was at his peak, and you could probably argue that Madonna was as well.
Both of them were.
Yeah.
The eyes were on them, and all of a sudden you find yourself within those eyes.
Yeah, I don't think that I had the ability coming from the Midwest to really understand what I was in.
So, like for somebody that's looking at your work, what's some of the first things you do there? Like you're trying to set up this structure on this, this organic pulsating thing that's moving all about. Who do you ask? Who do you call? Like, what do you how do you figure that out?
Yeah, at the time I had belonged to a couple different organizations, and one was like ASIS, if you know what those guys are, and they had a executive protection guy who was a retired cop, and he put on courses for that. I did that, and I had done Blackwater's courses on that, and so I had some exposure, but nothing could prepare you for that, because what you're training for is more of a diplomatic security kind of protocol and
like
service.
a State Department package.
Exactly. And I have that background too. And what they do and teach is great for, diplomats and executives and things like that. But in terms of entertainers,
international airports, press conferences, filming on locations, dealing with local authorities in countries where you can't speak to them, like that, all of that.
But without the infrastructure, right? And without the deep pockets to fund it. So I had a guy who actually used to run the Protective Service Operations Program at FLETC come out and see some stuff behind the scenes in the tour. Like, why don't you just do this? I'm like, doesn't work that way. And he's like, you can't do this? No, he goes, fuck. Like, yeah, this is a different world. And we don't have the funding to do those kinds of things, and they're not going to tolerate it. So GB3, we'll just call him GB3.
So you were asking some people about this. You were trying to figure it out for yourself.
I was piecing it together. I was reading and I was watching and I was trying to figure out how to integrate and still get the job done. And that was not easy.
Yeah, that's complex. Like, what's your first, like, oh, okay, we're going to go do these series of things. Like, what was that like?
It was pretty fast because we were going to take a vehicle onto a tarmac and we were going to get on a Gulfstream, a G5. And
Have you ever done that before?
Never.
So
Never.
You're learning on the fly.
Well, I had gone. I mean, I had a lot of information and knowledge. I just hadn't done it to this degree.
Yeah.
And so,
are you admitting that to your clients, or are you just like, this is natural, let me just do this?
No, guy knew the deal. He'd known that I had done protective work down here, and he knew, what my experience was. So I was open with him. It was just that they had said, "Here, it's yours.
Go."
So go. And there were a number of people on the team. They were all British, and those guys did not like it. They didn't like this outsider coming in. They didn't like that I was fighting and training with Guy. They didn't have those skills, so there was this animosity.
Were these the types that are hired for their profile, or were they professionals? Or
a combination of both, but some of them had backgrounds. There was another guy that didn't have any background, but he had run things because he was smart and he selected people that were trained. And so coming in, they were super defensive and territorial. They didn't like it. In fact, they provided disinformation, misinformation. They manipulated a ton of stuff that was coming my way, and they would say to my face things that just weren't factually sound to get me to make a decision that wasn't correct. So after a few times of that, then it becomes much more complex, because now I've got to try to figure out what reality is based on what I see and based on what they're telling me, based on what the client's saying.
Verify.
Absolutely.
Cross-reference.
So the old adage in the government used to be trust but verify, and it was the opposite of that. It was like, I'm not trusting until it's verified. Like, no way. And you only need to be burnt once or twice, and it's like,
you're done.
Yeah. So you look at source reliability, and you look at information credibility. It's
management of people, it's management of drama, it's administration, it's a lot of things, a lot of weird things they probably don't teach you at the executive protection course that you're going.
No, it's all gray space stuff, know, and it's all stuff that's not directly related to that job. It's soft skills, right? Yeah. And all the hard skills I learned are great, but in reality, everything that I was applying was a soft skill.
Yeah. What's like, this is late 90s. What does your gear bag look like? What do you nothing?
No, not nothing. It was limited, right? So you had
was there any? There's no trauma medicine. There's no trauma kits in there.
No. So there were first aid, and then there were edge line kind of trauma stuff. They had masks, they had nasal pharyngeals, but like in terms of like cat tourniquets and quick clot, like at the time, quick clot was just being developed, and it was a powder, if you remember. They didn't have any of that. You didn't have chest seals. You didn't have Israeli bandages. You didn't have any of that stuff. So you would have, bandages and maybe nasal pharyngeal and a couple of wraps and, very rudimentary. Nothing at all. I mean, because at the time we didn't have 20 plus years of war.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing to kind of base that on yet. You have this new job. You're dealing with these people who are openly hostile to your presence there, probably. You have this responsibility. It's a big one. the travel, the figuring things out. What was your first mistake? Because there's always one. I always ask that question when it comes to some of these people starting off on some of these processes. What was your first mistake in the lesson that you got from it?
You know what? The mistakes were vast. I just, to even pick one out is difficult. But, timings of things. One of the things, too, that happened, because Guy had so much confidence in me with jiu-jitsu, one of the problems was that he would just throw something at me and expected it would get done. And I would do everything I could, but some things were new. Like driving on the left side, right? Like, okay, I'm not used to this. This is new. Like, I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. I'm in the wrong side of the car. And so probably one of the first mistakes that I recall is just the timing of that, like making so many wrong turns on the wrong side of the road and the wrong side of the car, having so many issues there. And then like something that should have been, I don't know if you know the roads in London, but they're not straight lines. It's not a grid system. So you're going up and around and over, probably like Boston is.
Okay.
And the biggest thing initially that occurred was like through not understanding some of those variables, my timeline was off. So we would always do a reverse timeline to figure out how much time we needed to do something. And I was late picking up Guy by like 40 minutes, and it was all related to traffic and driving and things like that. Not having that buffer, not knowing, for example, the timeline in that city at that time.
So not knowing and not admitting or openly solving limitations that I'll figure it out, and all of a sudden you find yourself against the wall.
Yeah, because my attention was divided.
Yeah.
My attention was so divided amongst so many things that you couldn't be 100% at any one of those things. And if it happened to be the thing that you put 60% attention on, it didn't turn out so good.
A question that a very young me would ask you as somebody starting off on this business. What's the explanation to your client after you get late like that?
Oh, I fell on my sword. I came clean. Like, look, this is what happened. I didn't anticipate this. It won't happen again. I'll make sure this, X, Y, Z. But I ate it. And he knew who I was. He knew what I was about. So it worked out. So I didn't have to come up with anything for that.
Some people don't do that.
I have a couple really big clients still to this day that if you come to them with a bullshit excuse and they smell that, they even get a whiff of bullshit, you're done.
You're done.
But if you come and say, hey, I fucked up. This is what I did. This is what I was thinking. I won't do that again. And they're forgiven.
Trust and honesty is a very powerful currency in that realm.
It's everything.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah. So that's interesting foray into that. So you're working this detail. How long was that?
We did some work leading up to the tour was called the Drowned World Tour. We did some work leading up to it, and then we did the tour, which was the U.S. and Europe.
Was this your first basically touring with a client?
Yeah, this was the first big real deal, like holy shit kind of tour. I mean, a lot of moving parts, a lot of people coming and going.
What is that like? It's basically being involved in this roving government, basically, in a way, right? It is a
government. Yeah, it's a government. You got 200 people on the tour. You got 30 trucks full of sets and all kinds of crazy stuff. You got tour buses, you got jets, you got private jet for her, and you got band and dancers and other people as well. You're moving country to country, city to city. You're dealing with the family politics. You're dealing with the management group politics. You're dealing with the individual, like execution level people politics, and you're crossing through all those thresholds. And if you get hung up in one of those spots, you can't complete your main objective.
So again, new guy asking, you're put in charge of this specific function on this tour. Like, what do you wish somebody told you about that first responsibility? Focus more on the hotels, figure out exit strategies. Like
none of that.
What was the thing you wish you could go back and somebody tell you about it?
To have more flexibility.
Not be stern. This is the box, and you can't go out of this. This is the way we're going to do things.
To explain to me that having more flexibility will lead to a better end outcome, right? And less stress and less bullshit. And to have a sense of humor, to see the humor in all of this silly stuff that goes on. It took me years to get to the point where I could laugh at all of the silly, crazy, unreal shit that would happen in that realm.
Yeah, but when you were there, it's like serious. The end of this
you're
is
in
the
it.
world depends on this aspect of it, and you didn't.
So insignificant in reality,
Yeah.
but in that little space, in that sphere, it's critical
It's
for
critical.
survival.
It's critical. How many stops were on that tour?
I couldn't even tell you. I mean, you could probably go out, look it up, but I would guess that we probably hit 20 countries or so in Europe, and we hit maybe 50 cities in the U.S. And actually, 9/11 happened when we had a show scheduled at the Staples Center on that tour, and she had a house in New York, and she had her people there, and even family members there in New York. So I had the displeasure of waking her up on 9/11 in LA.
Informing.
In LA at her house in Beverly Hills, and because I was staying there, and that was a whole nother conversation to have because she was not happy to be getting woken up so early and by the security guy.
Yeah.
So that was different. Guy understood it, she didn't, and it took probably a day for it to sink in, and we ended up canceling obviously that night. But that was an interesting time.
This moving from place to place every day. You're doing this giant event. Do you have to write down where you are at a certain day sometimes on your hand, or
on the front end, it's easy to remember because it's exciting and it's new and your retention's really good. When I do it now, it doesn't matter what city I'm in. It's just another city, and I've been there 30 or 40 or 50 times, and it's a complete blur. But in the early days, it was so interesting and so exciting that I remember every little component of all of those places.
Yeah, it's new. It's a new experience.
Yeah,
it's like the first time going through it.
And it was, and it was something that you can't learn any other way than doing it. Nobody can teach you. Nobody can show you. Nobody can tell you. You have to do it, and you have to feel it.
Outside of the unfortunate events of 9/11, like on this tour, like what were some of the lessons, like cities that were problematic, issues that you might have had?
Most of those were in Europe, and most of those were kind of paparazzi focused.
Yeah.
Where you'd have to employ some really crazy, unconventional techniques to stop them.
Basically, people were sniping your clients. They wanted to get them. And
but you don't want them to know where you're staying. You don't want them to know what you're driving. You don't want them to know kind of where you're going to be and what you're doing. And
are you running counterintelligence on your end? Or you're,
in a very light sort of way. So because I'd come from the Marine Corps, I had understood what I had in the way of MSG duty, Marine Security Guard duty, and what a regional security officer in the embassy did. So I had at least the forethought to go talk to those guys or to have a call with those guys or to have them come visit me and offer tickets to a show for their family. And that paid huge dividends for me. So I had that, but with respect to paparazzi, there's no relationship. And something that people don't get, and I didn't get, is that while I'm doing all of this to prevent certain things from unfolding, there's a publicist who is letting that information go out so that all of that does indeed happen. So they will undo everything. And I didn't know that, and nobody told me. And I guess it makes sense in hindsight, but why would they do that? Well, because they're trying to get the public eye, but not. Yeah, and so that was another fight that you had to have on a regular basis, and then you'd compartmentalize information just like we do in the military and say this person gets this piece and that person gets this piece and this piece, and so nobody gets the big picture, and therefore you can't be compromised easily.
Yeah, this aspect of also being responsible for their moral security. When I say moral, I mean in the public eye, as far as image control.
That's a factor too. But you have to remember when you get with people like Madonna, the more provocative, the better. And so all publicity is good publicity, even when they're saying things that would be seemingly bad.
Was that an issue for you where you were like, Madonna is doing something that is, hopefully nobody takes a picture of it, but that was what it was for, maybe, I guess. Did you run into issues where you weren't you weren't in on the fact of the joke, basically?
Yeah, I mean that would certainly happen, where they knew what you would do if they told you what they were going to do, and then it's too late. You're in the middle of this thing. It's like, oh man, And that happens sometimes with clients. I come from a military and law enforcement background, and then I'm outside of DOJ with a client who's protesting, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, this is what it is. But the guys that know understand what your job is, and you don't get to pick and choose. Just like if you were Secret Service, you don't get to say who the president is. Oh, I want to work for this one, but not that one. And you accept the job and you do your business.
Yeah. How long does that last?
So we did that tour. We did some videos. I think it was a BMW video, and then we ended up doing a film, which ultimately I think flopped. But Guy did a film with her in Sardinia and Malta, and to be honest, I don't even recall the name of it. But it came out and went away in record time back when movies were significant, and they stayed in the box office for months. It was here and gone. Yeah. Swept Away is what it was called. So we did that, and then that wrapped up, and my intention was to go back to just fighting, right, and to be in the Marine Corps Reserve so I can keep the credit that I built up in the Marines. And that didn't happen because I ended up in this industry and sticking around. We picked up some executives doing bits and pieces overseas, but ultimately what brought the lion's share, 80% of our business is entertainment, and mostly music with some film mixed in.
And how's this aspect of going from that detail? How do you transfer from that, or how do you what is that like? Do you get a letter of recommendation? Is it all of the experience and the connections that you already made there, and how basically utilize them to further your?
I was so stuck with her and Guy that I really didn't make any relationships with the production manager, the tour manager, or the agent.
Hindsight, would you?
Well, no, I was too close. I was I was on them, and so that wasn't necessary at the time, and it was such a big thing that I was literally at the top, and so I didn't need to develop those relationships. But by chance, my roommate at the time was a jiu-jitsu guy, a black belt at Hickson's teaching. And he had asked me to come train with him and another guy who turned out to be a rock star. And so we're training, and then that guy had an issue with his guy, and the first guy thought it was me. And so...
What do you mean by that?
He wanted also to train jiu-jitsu, and I had told him the story about Madonna and Guy. Yeah. And he's like, that's perfect for me.
Yeah, I'll do jiu-jitsu with you, and you can also be security. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is, they don't get that there really isn't a significant relationship between being able to fight and doing security. 99% of security is the opposite. It's planning, it's choreography is what it is, right? So you're doing all this thing to set this thing up, and then you have the close protection component where you're on them and you're making movements like foot movements and stuff like that, and vehicle movements. But most of security is not fighting. And if you're fighting, that means everything else has failed. 100%. And also with celebrities, if I'm fighting, who do you think's getting sued? Yeah. I don't have any money. You can't take anything from me. So it's just a bad deal. But in their minds, the fact that I can fight,
it's like a big plus.
It makes me capable of being a security guy. And there is almost no truth to that, but they saw it that way. And again, it's entertainment, it's a story, and they believe this story.
And it's also like in some parts of popular culture, the whole aspect of having this big dude behind you,
Yeah, and big like me, right?
Yeah, sure.
5'10" and 175 pounds. No, but I had the MMA background, I had the jiu-jitsu background, multiple black belts, and I had plenty of street credibility where I came from. So that was enough for them. And some of the clients that we have, and including the next one that we're talking about, they're smaller people. And so they don't want this massive human next to them because it draws attention. And they're smart enough to know that they can get in and get out if they have no signature or low signature, and it's somebody similar in size and it looks right.
That makes sense.
Because even if you're an untrained eye, you're going to see something. It's going to capture something. Why is that 5-foot tall blonde girl with this guy that's like 6'8" and 350 pounds? And
let's figure out what that is. Yeah.
Yes. It draws your attention. Absolutely.
So you find yourself in the same situation. Somebody is looking at your jiu-jitsu skills, like, I can get 2 for 1 with this guy. Can roll with him on the weekends, and then on the days that I have to be on stage, he can figure things out for me.
Yeah, and by the time I got to him, I understood how all of that worked.
So
I could put it into place. So
you're already gone through that process and failed a few times, and not knowing what side of the street to drive in and all that. So you already had that.
Absolutely. All that stuff was out there. I understood how all of it worked. I understood how it needed to be manipulated, modified, adjusted, changed. And he gave me the platform to do it. So it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it's this different artist, obviously, but in the same venue, emotion, creative energy.
Absolutely.
Spur of the moment type situation.
Yeah.
And you already knew how to formulate your fence around that.
Yeah, I understood what I was dealing with. I understood the environment that I was in, and I understood what I really needed to do to make things work. And I also understood at that time that I had hit a ceiling financially. Like, this is what the industry will yield for this position. So if I want to grow, I got to have a team. And it's better to put my guys in that I can trust than hire somebody else and be stuck at the ceiling, so I can make some money and I can have a solid network.
So your brain is developing into this aspect of, this could be much better and more structured and bigger. And if I already have the letters to it, I just have to form the word.
Yeah, so it's the ability to have force multipliers that will support you in your mission, your job, your function, and then the ability to make a percentage of each of those individuals. And I had come from an environment that was team-based.
Yeah.
And so, on Madonna, I learned that teams can hurt you if you're not in them.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be in that situation again, so started developing the team, and it's grown ever since. And I think that was the last time we got hired because of the fighting component.
Yeah.
And that was 20 plus years ago.
So you're hired by this rock star who, says, I'll trust you. I'm giving you this responsibility. You have to form a team, I'm asking you questions as somebody that wants to get into this industry or somebody that might, be interested in this. You are forming your team. What are you looking for? Are you looking for people that you know, that you trust? Are you looking for dudes that have fighting skills? Hey, look at my black belt. Hey, look at all these all the courses that I have. Like, what are you looking for in an individual?
And that's a great question, because inevitably you want people that you like or that you respect or that have certain skills, but I needed something different. So personality was the biggest factor. If they could adapt with their personality type and learn the stuff and then apply it, a doer, a worker, that was who I was after, and that's who I ended up finding. And certainly I found jiu-jitsu guys, but that was just a byproduct down the road. In fact, the client actually just in hindsight trained so much that he opened up his own jiu-jitsu school. So Rockstar with the jiu-jitsu school. But in terms of developing our team, most of the guys are not jiu-jitsu guys. They end up training jiu-jitsu because they're motivated by what they see, but they're guys who are flexible. And I found guys that have an extensive background, they bring a lot of trash and trauma with them.
Yeah.
And so guys who have a limited amount of experience, enough to be tested, who are motivated, who are dedicated, who maybe don't have a lot of family baggage, those are our best guys. Those are the guys that stay the longest. Those are the guys that do the best job. Not some high-speed operator, not some pro fighter.
Most underappreciated skills as somebody working in this industry. What are some of those that people just don't, focus on?
Going back to what I mentioned earlier, which is one, being super flexible, being to adjust on the fly.
People skills.
People skills. Two is the ability to quickly develop personality profiles on the people in the room and then be able to acclimate to that, right?
Yeah. So not to adopt the protective yellow or red on every single room you step into with this client.
Yeah, so the understanding, what your end objective is and not being so fixated on the structure or format it takes to get there. So being able to be flexible in how you do stuff or how you see stuff and how you present stuff relative to the environment. Most of the time, things don't unfold the way you're trained. Almost never.
Yeah.
And even when we're training guys today, we deal with some of the formalities. We have to show them the protocol, but then say, hey, this is 10% of the time. This is a formal environment. Most of the time it's going to be in the gray space. So guys that are really good at picking up cues, whether it's visual cues or auditory cues, or however they function, and then adapting to it. That's by far the most important aspect.
How did you learn this? How do you learn this? Like, do you go to a training program?
No, I mean, I the amount of training
do you
I've done
work in
is
the
vast.
service industry for a bit? And
No, I think that there's part of it that is innate. It's in your DNA. It's in your makeup. Your predisposition.
Some people are just predisposed to this. It doesn't matter how much I train or how much I do.
Yeah.
Some people just don't work out for this. That's a pretty honest thing to say.
Fact. That's a fact. And then the other side is just being open enough to take something new in, and then to try to physically adapt yourself to that. And obviously, before you can adapt physically, you have to have the mental component there. So you see a lot of guys, they function great in austere conditions, but then you get in this room and it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Because the rules are different, right? So you can't apply the same rules in every space. It doesn't work that way. It's not cookie cutter. And even within the industry, the norms between pop or between rock or hip hop, they change.
Yeah.
Country, completely different animal. So when I'm looking for guys, and what I would tell younger guys is to have that level of adaptability, to understand that when you come in at the bottom, it's really important to take in everything, talk less, see more, and then really work your ass off. And I think that will yield the result that almost anybody is looking for, no matter who the group is, what the company is.
The visuals of it, like people from the outside looking into this, life choice as far as a career path. The positives, we hear some of the positives as far as how people are learning and traveling and figuring things out. What are some of the negatives of it? You mentioned young, unwed, probably no kids. Those are pretty great.
Yeah.
Basically
Yes.
unattached.
Yes.
I imagine they miss out on a lot.
Yeah. So if you think about sleeping in your own bed, or being around your family or your friends, or having your own schedule, or being able to jump off the beaten path and go somewhere. Hey, my favorite coffee shop is in Lisbon, and I'm in Lisbon, I can't go to my favorite coffee shop. Or I'm in this city where my best friend lives and I can't go see my best friend. So you are living somebody else's life. Whatever they like to do, whenever they like to do it, however they like to do it, is exactly what will happen with you. So if you have a client who does shit that you hate, that's going to be your life.
That's going to be your life.
And if they do things that you're repulsed by, that's going to be your life.
These are some of the negative aspects. Well, these are some of the costs to this.
It is a cost, and I think in a lot of cases it's negative, and typically the good outweighs the bad, in that you're traveling around the world, you're getting paid to travel around the world, you're staying in 5-star hotels, and you're not digging ditches, right? And threat level relative to being in Iraq or Afghanistan is extremely low, but exist. So when you look at it, the cost normally is a reflection of it's done by somebody that's been on the job a while. They start to really understand and look at it like, okay, I'm giving up X to get Y.
Yeah.
So you think you're making good pay, but if you look at it in terms of hourly wage, if you're working 16 to 20 hours a day, 6 days a week, you're not really getting paid that well. It seems like, oh yeah, I'm getting paid, 6 figures to do this, but hourly, you're not.
Yeah. That's interesting to kind of look at. You start forming your team. Do you start forming a curriculum? Do you start forming a way to create that team? Do you start figuring out what do I need these people to be proficient at training wise? Is that I know you had your life experience and your training and some of that in the background, but like I could do this better. It's basically what I imagine you clicked in your head.
Yeah. So the Mark I motto, the average guy in the business is not trained, does not come from the military law force, does not come from true protective service operations background. They're big, and their qualification is being big, and that's the industry norm. So my thought very, very soon, like maybe within 2 years, is like start the business, bring the guys in, make sure that they have the right foundation, and then train them, teach them, show them, and then have them developing guys, right? So we started with a training group called Celebrity Protection Academy, and we started training guys right away. And so we're going into different markets, and we're dealing with locals. So you have contract security guys like a CSC or something like that who do event, and they're hourly wage guys who have almost no training. But there are guys that are motivated, that are hungry. And if you go through 100 of them, you might find one or two that are capable of doing the job. And you keep that relationship, and then you open up the training to them. And then what happens is when you have a training group, let's say I have 20 guys come to this training. They're paying to go to the training, but they're paying us to basically audit them, to look at them and do a selection assessment, right? So I'm assessing them and selecting them based on their performance. And so even in the training, even if some of it is similar to other trainings, we'll throw them curveballs. Like, okay, you got an hour for lunch, and then 5 minutes into it, nope, we're moving. And as these things happen, you get to see a little bit of their personality. Then, let's say we've been working them 20 hours. All of a sudden, the fights start breaking out, and it's always the same guy who's at the center of it. Like, that guy's no good for this job because he's going to have to work 20-hour days. So his personality or temperament's not right. You'll just get to see guys who are heroes in one aspect are zeros in another aspect, because this guy is tough and all that, but he can't handle these social skills. Or this guy's got the social skills, but as soon as it gets physical, this guy breaks. So it was an opportunity for us to see that. So we could charge, we could wash guys out, and we could handpick who we'd want to use.
Selection. It's a selection process.
It is a selection process, and it works out well because we get to see them in a lot of different conditions, right? So we create the conditions. We train them on the things we want to train them on. And so, there are processes for the admin side, right? For the advancing and the logistics components. And then there are the stress inoculation components where it's very revealing.
Yeah.
Very, very revealing.
Having somebody walk up to you, spit in your face, and swallowing that shit and having to just go about your job because you're not there to monkey dance with anybody. And I imagine a few people there will react.
Yeah. You're on your 20th, sixth day of 20 hours of work, right? You're outside. You haven't eaten that day. It's 35 degrees outside. It's raining now, almost snowing, and you deal with this shit. And it's just things pile up, right? The
pressure. So you go from being ground level, figuring things out as you go, wishing that you had some sort of manual or some sort of specific instruction for working in this weird realm of entertainment, security, international travel, figuring things out, working with emotions, selecting people that are optimal for this type of weird dimensional work. You go from that, figuring out for yourself. I assume you were taking notes along the way.
I took notes and I wrote a book, literally.
So
literally.
Were you, while you're going through this process of gaining that experience, which is something that when I was going through my experiences, I would always keep notebooks. That's the name of my social medias is usually Ed's Manifesto, and the manifesto aspect of it was usually a notebook that I would keep writing in, basically. Were you avidly taking specific notes and figuring things out as far as later on, I'm going to work on this book?
I documented everything. One is it's a CYA mechanism.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I went back in the notes and figured out all the stuff that I didn't know that a guy at the lowest level coming in would need to know, and then produced a book called All Access, The Secrets of Tour Security. And they're not secrets, but they're things that I didn't know that if another guy was coming in that he would need to know, because there was no book, there was no manual. Yeah. And so that was the result.
The aspect of the aspect of having a structured, hey, this is how things work, or at least this is how things worked for me in this experience, and it might help you out in yours.
Yeah, but a basic in-brief, because there was no in-brief. There was nothing.
There was a talk. It was a talk.
It was a short conversation.
And then here you go.
Yeah, you think about it normally with a job, here's the scope of your job. Here are your duties. Here's how you're going to do it.
Job description. Somebody handing off responsibilities to you? None of that.
Nothing. Non-disclosure agreement, non-compete agreement, and that was it. You're off. Good luck. Okay, here I go.
Okay, and this led to you putting everything into a document,
which
book.
Might be one back there. The thinner one, it says All Access, and it's got a laminate on it. That one was the first one, and that book's like 13 or 14 years old now. It's got a white cover, and it's got like an outline of a laminate, thin one. There it is. So that guy came literally out of taking those voracious notes, like just nonstop note taking and information.
And again, when you're taking these notes, this is your main objective. I'm going to figure out how to turn this into a book, or you're like, this is probably stuff that I should keep somewhere so I know it and I have to reference it back.
Yeah, I mean, it was with the understanding that there are people that don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
But the intention was not a book. The book came because literally I would have guys asking me, hey, I see you're doing it this way. How did you learn that? Or what? And it was trial and error. Like the vast majority of stuff that we're doing is based on trial and error. And so I put some of that together, how to look at situations, how to deal with it. And this book, like I said, I mean, that's 13 or 14 years old. It's not even around anymore.
Yeah. This all access, did this, in Mexico we have this saying, do a good deed and watch the snakes come out of the grass.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So even the name alone, like, oh, you're telling secrets. You shouldn't be telling people our secrets. Like,
was there a little bit of
absolutely
controversy?
Yeah. So you have plenty of guys who are like, well, I can't believe you put that out. I can't believe you did. It's like, can't believe I did what? What
were the worries that you are now becoming a voice in an industry where supposedly you're not supposed to be?
Yeah.
Where silence is golden, basically.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at any of the publications that I've done, none of them are tell-all stories. None of them talk about the artist. None of them, literally. Yeah. But I think it's more of a voice in general because it's a small space, and if somebody develops a voice in that small space, they're going to get more business. And if they get more business, they're taking it from someone else. And so it's a protective territorial response to what it is that person's doing.
I mean, again, the currency of trust and the currency of discreetness and all that, and all of a sudden you have this book that talks about none of that, but specifically how to basically go about the job, around the job.
I mean, you get in the book, and then there's a timeline. Like, what am I doing? I have to do venue security. What are the things I need to be worried about? It's not just hand somebody a pass sheet with the credentials on it and you're done. There are a lot more things, and so getting a timeline of how you should use your 20-hour day, how to do assessments, how to apply certain aspects of it, what certain standards need to be. That wasn't written. That didn't exist. And so putting that in place at least is a good starting point. Is it archaic? Maybe. I mean, it's 13 or 14 years old, but it still gives a person who's never had any experience some understanding of how it all works.
And when you say it's archaic, that's usually we're the biggest critics of our own work, right? And specifically when time goes by, you're like, ugh.
Yeah, because you grow and you know what your growth is, and you know the vision you had before and how it kind of evolves with times. But I mean, even in the last 10 or 15 years in terms of technology, think about the difference.
The people having to lock their cell phones when they go into a concert, COVID restrictions, mass shooting events in public in concert venues, and what does that mean as far as your job?
Absolutely, your critical incident protocols completely change. Your personal security postures will change based on what the iPhone is doing. When the iPhone didn't exist, information was a lot easier to kind of.
So these are interesting questions. So smartphones. We'll start there. Like smartphones and the ability to record anything, anywhere, everywhere. And the job that you do and the job that you train other people to do. What changes there? Technology-wise, countermeasures?
Everything. The biggest problem that we face comes from the inside, not from the outside.
Everybody's a potential camera.
Absolutely. Everybody actively has a recording device. So whether it's audio recording, right, whether it's the video recording, everything 24/7 is being recorded. And so when I'm having a private conversation with an artist, or an artist wants to have a private conversation with a manager or agent or someone else, our job is to brief them, to take control of those things. If you think about going into an embassy, what's the first thing they're going to collect? Right? You need that to be out of the way. And also, if you're tracking where I'm going and what I'm doing, my location, this is the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
And you have no idea it's happening. So
having basically a basic understanding of information signal security, cell phone security, and just things that were normally relegated in the realm of, this is a very specialized thing. But now you have to be educated on,
At a minimum, right?
minimum
Understanding how that works, right? How does your SIM card work? How does your phone's individual ID work, right?
Yeah.
And then in that
cell
signature,
phone towers, repeaters, how does that work? How they
absolutely.
how they track?
Let's reverse it. What happens when you do have a critical incident and your radios aren't functioning and your plan is to go to your cell phone and your cell phone, the towers are not functioning because they're overloaded? Now what, right? So, for example, we use MeshNet apps, right? So it's talking Bluetooth, but then I'm in concrete. So the distance, instead of being 100 meters, might be 20 meters. So, understanding the capabilities, how it can work for you, how it can work against you.
And how to,
think about encryption. Think about things like, different networks that you can connect to. How do you filter stuff that's going out? How do you filter stuff that's coming in?
The educator aspect of you as a service provider and your protectee or your client saying, "Hey, what's a recommendation for a secure cell phone?" And it can't be like, "I don't know, let me check." You have to have answers. That's part of like an assumption of how things are now.
Yeah, I think if they're aware, if they're cognizant of what is happening around them, it makes sense. If they have the mindset, well, I'm not doing anything illegal, I'm not worried about it, that's a problem. The support network around artists are predominantly yes men. And because of that, you have a lot of potential eyes and ears that information can go out with. And the whole time they're smiling and shaking their head, yes. And that's your source, right? They're giving away locations, they're giving away activities, they're giving away, people's personal opinions and their viewpoints on things. All of that information that goes out then in turn is utilized by a third party to manipulate the situation on the inside from the outside. Yeah. But the leaks for us almost inevitably are coming from the inside.
That's a different dimension to it. Again, speaking of archaic and how things change and evolve. Then you go into the Vegas shooting. And I don't know, as somebody from the outside looking in that event and how it transpired, and did it change things when it comes to like concerts in the United States, or was it just in a random event and it happened, and did anything change with that event? That's my question.
I think a couple things, and Vegas is just one of them, the Route 91 festival, but I think awareness went up. And where that's valuable for us in our line of work is that the artist now goes, oh shit, it could be me. The Manchester incident with Ariana Grande in the arena, that bombing, oh shit, it could be me. We had an artist overseas who's staunchly anti-gun, and we're doing shows in Belgium. And at the time, the people were working out of this specific neighborhood, going into France and doing these things and then coming back. And I had briefed them on it, and they're like, we don't want a high-profile guy around here. We don't want, long guns around. We don't want all this stuff. We're not pro-gun, so we don't want to have that in our presence. Okay, so I did it anyway, and ultimately what ended up happening is multiple bombings, gunfights in the street, and the same artist who told me they didn't want guns around them now asking me to put machine guns in the pit, in the barricade, and saying, hold on a second, we can't use those type of weapons in a concert in a large environment. Like that. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. So the perspective shifted, and the awareness of, oh shit, it could be me too. Now my opinion changes. Like, well, that's what we need to protect ourselves. Therefore, it's okay. So that was the biggest shift. So our TTPs with respect to how we did stuff, our critical incident protocols, how we used bike racks for gurneys, or how we placed trauma kits, or had certain strobe lights for emergency protocols, all that stuff remained the same. We just got more buy-in from the client.
Yeah, there was more of a value placed on it, like, this is why.
So what that means then is that you get the financial support and backing. So now we can put these things in place without trying to rob the money from some other place. It gets its own line item. And then training on that, they get buy-in. So they'll take a briefing on a regular basis regarding it. And they've got more time for it because it can affect them directly. Yeah. So that's the big shift, was awareness.
And this, you talk about firearms and rifles and this inclusion of them in a security apparatus of entertainment, which is, it's a strange, it's a strange environment for those things to be present, and the training around that. I mean, is there, again, your whole aspect of how you select and kind of form people, I encountered the problem of having ex-military individuals coming into a protective circle around a politician, for example, where their main solution was, how do
if
you,
you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
yeah, how do you, and also it's, if you're in a reactive type mindset, and how do you, when it comes to firearms and their place within the industry, what specifically changes around it as far as the training and the exposure to them, and how people work around with firearms, basically, in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, in our industry, I think that pistols have been, the common thing that you see because of concealability, right? But everyone knows anything about firearms is, that's inferior to a rifle.
Yeah.
The reason that we don't use rifles is because they're so overt. They're, that's that. But now they understand in certain places we need a higher signature, a higher profile. And it's not the big, bald guy who's 6'8" and 300 pounds. That's not it. We need a trained element with assets or tools that can solve the problem. Because when the adversary presents this specific problem, there's only one solution. And it's not to just scream and yell. In our job, as you know, is to evacuate. It's to take them out. It's to remove them. It's not to have the fight. Our first opportunity to remove ourselves from the situation, that's the plan.
Yeah.
Second to that, right, we're trying to move. And then last is barricading in place. And then when that fails, then it's the fight, right? So they are starting to understand that, starting to accept that. They're seeing us train, they're seeing us do things, and now we're starting to finally have management groups ask, hey, do you have a plan for this? So, since the inception of tour security in the 60s, nobody cared. They didn't even know what the job was that they were hiring them for. They thought it was just a physical presence, right, this big guy. Finally, in the last few years, have they started to ask, like, do you have a plan? What's your plan for X? What's your plan for Y? What's your plan for Z? And those are the best conversations in my 25 years, the best conversations I've ever had.
Yeah. Just figuring out solutions and figuring out evolving solutions.
Well, including management groups or agents or artists themselves into these protocols and giving them daily briefings and giving them, a critical incident plan that shows them where the Trauma One hospital is, where the embassy is, where a safe haven is, where a stash car is. When I can dial them into that, they can see the value of what we're doing in an emergency scenario. And they feel a little bit more comfortable. And they also don't feel like they need to manipulate it. They understand it just enough. And they have just enough confidence that they let you do your job. And that's massive for us.
The world changed with COVID. From your perspective, like being in this industry where people are out and there's crowds and, that's the art, what was your view of it when it started? Like, what was your initial thoughts of it? Everything just shutting down.
Well, I think I was probably like everybody. You don't know what you have, right? Because there's no time. It just boom, it's off. And there was a ton of bad information that went out, and whether it was malicious or not, I don't know. So we had to shut down. We started seeing it happen. I was on a jet in Australia with a client, just the two of us, and he ended up getting sick and couldn't smell wine one night at dinner. And that was like, okay, we know what this is after the fact. So I got it, and it wasn't that bad, and it wasn't bad for him that time. And about a month later, we were back in the States, and everything started shutting down. So this is like the second week of March. And so I wasn't sure. And then as I watched it, I had less and less confidence in the information that was coming out because it was conflicting with what I had witnessed and what I had experienced. But nonetheless, they shut us down for close to 18 months. And that meant all the tours that we had out, all the films on location dried up. Nothing. Yeah. Everybody packed it up and went home. And
holding pattern. An unknown time limit to this holding pattern. Now you have to stop everything and maintain people.
Yeah, 85% of the business done. That's it. And then with the governmental stuff, the trainings that we had going on, they froze that.
Yeah.
And then, they started implementing different stuff. And with DT, or defensive tactics training, you're going to be up close and personal. You're going to be breathing on them. You're going to be sweating on them. You're going to be bleeding on them. So, it's not a classroom thing with this social distancing, right? You can't do that. That doesn't work in those realms. So that became a lot of conversations, a lot of documentation. And it seemed like to me, a really big part of it was people were scared and they didn't know what they had, and they were worried about the liability of what they chose.
The liability aspect of it. And, this kind of leads me into reopening after COVID, and people trying to keep everybody safe, people moving around, like you say, basically the security gypsies, and not being far away from medical management, or not having people there that can figure things out for you, and getting sick on the road, that type of aspect of it. That's scary, That's an unknown and a scary thing for some people.
I think
going back into this post-COVID
thing.
The
group of people that we work with tend to be people who overestimate the risk of certain dangers like physical violence and underestimate dangers in other realms, right? Like drugs or
alcohol,
or sex with a hooker or whatever it may be. So it's a really weird relationship there in understanding how they assess risk and then how they apply that assessment. So when we came back, they did the 6-foot distancing thing. So they started moving the crowd around and spacing chairs out, and they started doing that within the group. They mandated masks, and several of the artists that we worked with immediately implemented a mandatory PCR test daily for all of the crew members. So
for people that don't know what that is, you describe the PCR test.
They're going to take a long swab and stick it up your nose and spin it around on both nostrils, and then they're going to put it in the machine and cook that, and it'll come back either negative or positive. And in some cases, kind of a weird interpretation of kind of middle ground. But for the most part, we were mandated to be tested every day by either a nurse or someone that was trained up, a COVID compliance officer is what they called them, who's not a medical expert of any sort. And they would do that. Now, not only did that take time out of our day to actually do that, but what would happen is they would start to ostracize people if they didn't follow very strict, stringent protocols. And again, this was based on concern with liability, and predominantly the concern was getting the artist, preventing the artist from getting COVID. Because if you got COVID, then the ship sinks. So the other side, and I think people don't think about this too much, is to put those types of protocols in place. We're talking about millions of dollars over the course of a 6-month leg.
It's expensive.
Crazy expensive. And then you have doctors on retainer who are, inferring certain things, or in certain groups that are trying to stay up to date on COVID and this variant and that variant. And we had people, the full spectrum, people who are like, this is a joke, to people who were just so scared they just locked themselves in a room and they stopped living. So, but I would say, as a broad stroke, the entertainment side, it was hyper fearful.
Yeah.
Even when they had data that would lead them to believe something else, they wouldn't accept it. So initially liability, and then after that, I think it was just enjoying some type of collective thing where we both commiserate and do this thing together, and you're part of this special club that wears the mask even when they're not mandatory.
Yeah. It was an interesting time. That was an interesting time for humanity as a whole, and we're still in it in a way. I guess the post-COVID thing, where that's like a part of thing. Is it part of current event security? Like the COVID protocols are still like a thing that people talk about, or
for some it is. In a lot of cases, it's related to political ideology, because at least in the States, it's divided on the political line, which in almost 50 years that I've been around. I've never seen something that's science related be divided left and right on the political spectrum, and this is that. And so some people want to demonstrate, what their ideological beliefs are, and
vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, mask versus non-mask, hand alcohol sanitizer for your hands every time you touch somebody. Don't touch somebody. Fist bump.
Yeah, and there's some things that are not congruent there, because if I'm backstage wearing a mask, and then when I go out in the crowd, it's not mandatory, and I can take it off and be exposed to 20,000 people screaming and yelling, or the person on the stage doesn't need to wear it, and the person in the front row is 6 feet from them screaming the lyrics to the song, if you're really concerned about that,
it's just nonsensical, completely nonsensical.
A lot of things were not congruent with the protocols that were taken and then the realities of that particular situation.
Yeah, and liability aspect of it is from also the workers.
But in reality, show me the case law or show me the cases where liability cases have been successful.
Somebody getting the flu at work and dying and then suing the company because he got the flu.
But there is none. So if you look at concerts, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing. So show me where somebody got the flu at a concert or got a cold or did something and they were successful at suing that artist or the promoter or the building or the security.
That was a looming fear. Well,
it drove certain actions and behaviors. The psychological implications, they're vast.
Yeah.
I mean, we could spend years talking about just that one component of it.
Yeah, and then the generation that grew up around it, and how they're, change.
Yeah, it's interesting that some people never questioned it for a second. It's just accepted and understood, and they fall in line. And I think from my side, I was shocked to see people who are theoretically anti-authority, anti-establishment, getting in line, marching and screaming and chanting.
Put on your mask.
Yeah, it's like, wait a second. You were on a stage saying question authority and think for yourself, and now you're screaming this government mantra. That's very odd. I mean, just aside from any of my own beliefs, just trying to think about like how they came to that conclusion, that was quite challenging.
You just went from 9/11 to COVID. Like you've done a lot of once in a lifetime events in our lives. Like we've been through a lot as a society. You and all the while again keeping notes on this. What are your main notes as far as security and venue security and basic artist security and these types of international events? What are your main notes on COVID? Not a pandemic.
That's definitely touching in some gray space for me because it's so driven by the client's political perspective and ideology. But when we looked at it from a theoretical perspective and the manipulations we needed to take, at the end of the day, we wouldn't do everything that was fully necessary if we were going to lose money or it was going to limit the income to a certain point, right? So, and I'll give you an example. In the U.S. in particular, and this is pretty much around the world, but let's say you have an arena floor and they take the square footage of that floor and they figure out how many people can go on that floor based on the fire marshal limit, how many people per square feet or meters, depending on where you're at. And so let's say they come up with that number as X. If we have to do X minus 500 because of COVID, all of a sudden now we're starting to get into their margin and it's like, it's not worth doing it. So what I found to be consistent, most things were inconsistent and incongruent, but the one thing that was consistent was if we could still make a good percentage on this, we were still going to do it. Yeah. So money driving decisions in the end, that was my main takeaway from this.
So as somebody whose opinion on this should be trusted in this setting, being able to figure out the cost of safety when it comes to COVID, if that could be basically quantified to the client, it would change the outcome probably as far as your work.
Dollars and cents.
Yeah,
I'll see how serious you are about this when I see your response to this spreadsheet with the numbers on it, right?
Yeah. Now you're a public figure now, which is again strange, in a job where you're kind of like in the background. Public figure as far as somebody that people look for, as far as information, as far as you figure things out. Does that change anything as far as your specific job when people know a lot about you before they meet you, basically, if they do their homework?
Seemingly it would change things.
Yeah.
But I don't think it has, because in my realm, I'm not really a public figure. I'm known in the circles that are interested in the subject. So if they're interested in protective service operations, they probably know me. If they're interested in martial arts, they probably know me. But outside of that, I'm completely unknown variable or entity. And as we talked about earlier with the publications that I've released and the podcasts I've done, I've not talked about stuff that's sensitive in a way that will come back and hurt us or harm us. So everything's been safeguarded and compartmentalized. So I don't think it changes a lot. I was a target before because of my relationship to artists. Again, I don't have anything to take, but the artists do. So they would utilize me as an agent acting on behalf of the artists to sue them civilly and get some money. But I don't think it changes too much. If it changes anything, it just it gives a voice to a subject that didn't have a voice before.
And which leads me to kind of talk about this guy. This is an interesting, like it says, peek behind the curtain, but it's not behind the curtain. It's like in front of the stage, around the stage, details outside of the loading docks at a concert venue. Just what you see going out and working. Is that kind of like a...
Yeah, so this book, Protective Perspective, follows another book that was very systems-based, very processes and ways of thinking and how we apply it. This book was really driven by the visual component. So I had talked to the artist from this particular group and said, hey, I'd like to take some pictures as we go along related to security components, if that's okay with you. And he said, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to. He happens to be interested in the subject matter. Yeah. So I'd stop and say, I need 30 seconds. Yeah, roger that. Take some photos. And so this book is basically structured in a way that the average person who's not interested in security, maybe they're interested in music in general, maybe they're interested in touring, maybe they're interested in photography or travel, this would be interesting to them. But what I try to do is have a photo or an image and then some type of summary thought regarding that on the page next to it. So this goes kind of the full gamut of daily operations on a tour.
So blowout kits, casualty response kits, and talking a little bit of what's in there. Actually being on stage or being beside the stage and talking about positioning. It's basically an interesting little window into what you're looking at and basically explaining what's happening as you do. So for anybody that has like travelers, people that are concert goers. If I'm a concert goer and I always tell people, if you go somewhere, it's probably a good idea to know what the janitor's job is. Absolutely. Probably a good idea what the admin guy's job is. Why? Awareness, just better awareness about what's going on around you.
Yeah, you're making informed decisions. Your understanding of the world becomes better.
That's interesting. Did you get any questions by the people, like the artists, like what are you guys doing as far as taking pictures around here?
No, I was very discreet and I was very short. I mean, any of these shots were taken within a few seconds on an iPhone, and they supported what I do, and it happens to be another person that's interested in 3 or 4 areas. So, this person was in the military, they do jiu-jitsu, they like a lot of the same realms. So we have an understanding, and I don't give away anything on their background, but there are components in there that would give you a true peek behind the curtain, because a lot of stuff is never seen, right?
A physical walkthrough of a venue, hotel room, like let's say for people listening to this who don't want to go into this industry, but they want to do a physical walkthrough of someplace. Physical walkthrough of a hotel lobby up into the room. What are you looking for?
So just to preface this, we do a written advance with the hotel, telling them what our expectations are and getting information of the structures that they have there, and then their capabilities in terms of human assets. And then when we're doing a walkthrough, we're looking at potential weaknesses or points of potential failure in our movements. So as we come in, we're first looking at how can we bring them? What are our options? So if we come through the front door, what problems does that present? If we come through the loading dock, if we come through a subterranean entrance, we're trying to figure out what our options are there. And then as we come in, how do we limit our exposure, our signature? That we're even there. We're looking at elevators, right? We're looking at how many people can fit in. Can they lock it down to just that location, hold it there, and then it can do what's called independent motion, move straight up to whatever floor we're going to so it doesn't stop on floors along the way. Can we go through service areas? How clean are those service areas? Do they have cameras? Are the cameras IP-based or the cameras hardwired? Who has access to the cameras in the control room? How long did they store the data for? So it gets into, an average hotel walkthrough is 3 or 4 hours for our guys. So we're collecting all the information to figure out who the decision makers are, what the capabilities are, what the options are for us. Just to talk about the cameras alone, knowing how long they store that data is important. And it's not because I'm worried about the maid going in and stealing something out of the room. It can be because my client is going to get drunk, and then I know he's got girls coming and going, and I want to safeguard his image from that. It can be a plethora of things. So, knowing how it works, how it functions, who has access, how it's set up. For example, if it's IP and wireless, who can actually extract that information versus something that's hardline and it's going to a hard drive. Yeah. Really critical things for famous people. And
if you're not famous, it's just you with somebody going to a hotel, doing this walkthrough. This is also something that you can basically kind of infuse into.
People have this weird sense that they're secure in a hotel room, and every person working in the hotel has access to that room. And when we're in foreign countries in particular, if a person's using a concierge, then that person knows where you're going and what you're doing and how you're doing it. Security knows when you're coming and going. Front desk managers know. Everybody's getting a piece of the pie. And in foreign countries, the value of that information, right, is high. And, giving that away for a couple bucks here and there or a few pesos here and there, that's critical to the structure of the safety around that person.
You talk about entries, access, exits, where your profile's less high, something easily applicable to anybody basically as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even you think about stairwells, right? Let's say going out, they have a crash bar and that works. But some places you go to, they have let's say a key card control on the elevator, but the stairwell is unsecured, so that's completely useless. And knowing that and understanding that and how to move around is a serious thing, at least in our realm.
Yeah. Privacy, technology, all of these things are like a multifaceted thing. You talk about elevators, fire code, building code. All of these things kind of basically pour into, this existing knowledge base that you have to. If you don't have it, you have to get it, or else you're not going to make it, basically.
Yeah, I agree. You will develop along the way, and if you don't, you'll go away. You'll become irrelevant, and you're done.
Can you change your tire?
Right?
Can you drive stick?
Well,
all of these questions will pop up in an event somewhere, and these are weird questions that you need to ask yourself now.
If I gave you the pictures from my last trip down here, which was not very long ago, doing a quick walkthrough with the driver in the vehicle, I had bald tires on an up-armored level 5 vehicle. So now I've got this box to protect them, but I can't move. I'm going to sit on the X because anything's going to puncture this tire. Yeah.
Did it have run flats on it?
It didn't have run flats either,
so
which is another thing.
That's not the excuse then. Because usually you'll have bald tires because people don't know how to change them with the run flats on in some places because they're not educated on
the problem was fixed in 20 minutes, but at the end of the day, they're pumping out what was available in that moment because they needed that money to keep coming in. And the company is a good company, but they needed to make money. They need to pay their guys. They need to move cars. And they understood it was a big client, but they didn't think someone would check, that someone would see that. I mean, even PSI, I've got 4 different PSIs on 4 different tires. Even with run flats, you start to see inconsistencies because no one's checking, no one's looking. What else do they have in the car? Let's say I have a political client who's involved in things, and then they've got a newspaper from some rival faction or group that will set the artist off or the political person off, removing that from the car. Yeah. Or the driver's got wrappers all over. The driver doesn't wear deodorant. They smell like BO or whatever it may be. Doing these little short advances prevent maybe with some people certain tailspins that will set them off.
And people don't realize how something as small as the driver doesn't use body deodorant. And now you have a client in the back who's really upset about that. And that's going to be affect the performance. That's going to affect everything.
Yeah, if they are emotional and they're moved by certain things, maybe they had a traumatic experience and the person they had it with smelled a certain way and they have a very keen sense of smell that has developed with them over the years, that's massive.
Yeah.
You can send them down the hole super quick.
If somebody wants to, go into this realm, this travel security, a lot of time put into it. What's your advice? What's the first step?
If they want to go into this realm, I would get formal training relative to executive protection or any type of protective security operations. And then I would find somebody that is a subject matter expert in it. And if it's in this realm within music or film or whatever it is, and then ask to be an assistant or ask to come in and work with them for free for a period of time. And they'll find somebody that will allow them to come in and ask to support on a local level. Hey, when you come to town, I'd like to support you post-training, right? So they get their training, they get their experience through working for free for somebody for weeks or months, or maybe it's a day, depending on what the need is. And that person will default back to them, and they'll bring them in. So for us, we have the training, and then normally how we move is with OJT. So we'll have a guy who gets trained up, and then in his realm where he knows the area, it can be a foreign country, it can be a city. When we get to that space, we'll utilize him a couple times where he doesn't get paid. And then we'll bring him in for a short exposure. It's like we're doing a private event and it's only going to be 2 or 3 days. We bring them in and pay them to see how they work with the group. And so it's incremental, and slowly they get the exposure, and slowly we can see if it's worth more time or more investment. And then once they've proven themselves, we bring them on board.
What do I need to train? Formal, executive protection.
Yeah. So
what auxiliary? Like, what would you recommend? Hey, dude, read a psychology book. Go to go do some jiu-jitsu with these guys. Hey, do cardio. What's that list look like for you?
It's long, but here's where I would start. I would start with being able to do assessments, right? To be able to come in and do an assessment. Like in the first book that I wrote, we looked at Carver assessments, a governmental model, and you can use that and scale it. You can do something simple as like a SWOT assessment: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Once you get assessments down, personality profiles, huge, and then start going to airports and trying to figure things out. Look at people, watch them walk, look at the bags they carry, look at their mannerisms. Start to utilize the environments that you can gain access to and figure stuff out. And when you come up with an idea of correlations result in whatever it is, go back and test it and see if you can prove that concept. And then get your hard skills, right? Shooting, fighting, driving, communicating. There are tons of schools out there. Just make sure that whoever's running that school does the thing in the real world, because right now there are so many schools where the people teaching did it 20 or 30 years ago, where they never did it at all. They've just been a teacher. So I think it's important to have that aspect.
That's an interesting observation, just that vehicle-wise, the technology and vehicle-wise, you can do. I did a drive course. I did driving courses probably 10 years ago, maybe 12. Armored vehicle, but then you put me inside of a electric vehicle. Like this is a new ship that I'm moving around in. What does this mean now for my work? Knowing a little bit about how mechanics change on some of the new modern vehicles and all these weird details, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, with that, you have to be able to function in the client's car, or to your point, if you're going to be on a tour bus, knowing how to get that tour bus in gear, knowing how to shift through gears if it's necessary, knowing how to open things and close things and access things, it's part of your job. And you have a window of opportunity maybe of minutes to figure it out.
With me, when looking at people that didn't want to fail in front of other people are usually bad news. People that didn't want to fuck up, or people that didn't want to ask questions. Another valuable thing one of my mentors told me is there's no stupid questions, just very awkward silences before death. Right? There's this moment where you don't know something and you ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. Mentorship, I think, is what you describe.
Huge.
What you describe a lot when you talk about bringing somebody on for moments and seeing how other people work and seeing the people with experience. It's mentorship.
All the key lessons that I've learned in my life outside of actual experience are from great mentors, really good mentors who will show you what they need to show you, the core things, and then let you figure other parts out. And as you and I discussed, there are instructors out there who won't demo something. They're a firearms instructor, they won't demo. They're a DT instructor, they won't demo. You're going to fuck stuff up.
Yeah.
And if the students don't get it, so be it. You got to go out there and put it on the line. So I agree with what you're saying 100%.
This is for people that want to get into it. The shelf life of somebody, this another aspect of it that I don't see a lot of people talking about. I want to mention and talk about it because I'm 40. I'm a Mexican 40, I had a rough go. I didn't take care of my body as well as I should have. Developing world medical around me, and I went through some things physically, banged up. What does that factor in the shelf life? Like, when is it? Is this a career path for people? People could stay on. Is it something you like? What's some of your advice as far as longevity in this field?
I think a lot of people are, if they're right for the job, they're in kind of a 3 to 5 year window on average, and they stay either because they really enjoy it or they understand it, or because they have no other options, and then they just fall apart and they get pushed out. But in terms of longevity, the biggest thing is not thinking you're the celebrity, you're the rock star. So in terms of spending money, in terms of drinking or anything else you may do, really living a different life as much as you can, because you're going to be forced into most of the components of their life, but you don't have to make the choices they make. And that's where guys go off the rails most frequently, right? They see that guy spending all this money, they spend all their money. Only they're making a fraction. At best case scenario, they're making 1% of what the artist is making, but they're spending like that. They're eating like that. They're drinking like that. They're behaving like that in some cases. So if you want to last in this business, you find a good pair of shoes that don't jack up your knees or your lower back. You stretch out when you can. When you have downtime, you go do jiu-jitsu or yoga. You drink as much water as possible, so long as you can hold your bladder when you're in a post, right? And don't have to run off to the bathroom. But there are a lot of little decisions that lead to the ability to do this long term. And the biggest thing I can say, you're not the artist, you're not the celebrity. Don't live like them, don't act like them. You have to live a much more controlled lifestyle.
It's our bodies are very valuable in this industry. So it's like a finite resource. Another finite resource, I think, is confidence in your work and discretion and being able to be trusted, and the trust aspect of it. Like, what would you say to somebody coming into this and they're like, I want to be trusted. Like, how can I be trusted? What do I need to not say? Do I need to not talk about it? Treat it like the CIA? Not talk about my life? Is this like this one of these things? Like, what's some of the advice you would give somebody like going into this?
That's huge. That's massive. And what I would say on that front is to not talk about anybody's business to anyone, because I know if you're spilling the dirt on somebody to me, that you're going to that same person spilling the dirt back and forth. If that's your MO, if that's how you operate that way everywhere. And people do that. So if you look at my social media account and it's about business and stuff, you don't see pictures of me hanging out with my clients. You don't see pictures of where we're at the moment. If I post something that's related to something that we did or where we're at, it's a day or a week or a month or 2 years later, and you can't use it now. Some guys are immediately posting up stuff. They're getting in a hotel and they're posting things up. And again, the problem comes from the inside. But as you noted, discretion is massive. And with respect to getting that confidence from a client, if they see that and feel that discretion over time, you're going to get it. One comes with the other. And the only way to do it is over time, because you can't get a good read on a day or a week or a month. It takes time, right? You got to be consistent across time.
people want to find out more about your work and your books, where can they find you?
Tour Protection, TOUR protection.com is our website. Instagram, which we just started maybe a year and a half ago, is at Tour Training.
I'm going to be sharing a few of these on my
Sweet.
Instagram account.
I appreciate
it's
it.
valuable stuff.
Little bits and pieces, right?
I wish I had some of this stuff when I was coming up. When I went into my career as an executive protection guy, it was because I was being cooled off because I was working operations. So they say, "Oh, send him over there. He'll cool off there," which is a mindfuck of a thing to do to somebody. From being reactive to just making stuff not happen.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's a really good point. One of the problems with any type of protective work is the result. And I mean, if I do everything perfect, the result is nothing. And so it's very hard when you're talking about getting money or support for something that produces a result of nothing, because the value of nothing, well, typically is nothing.
Yeah.
So that's hard. And unless it's a difficult thing to convey to somebody. Yes, I want a result of nothing. Nothing happened because we did what we were supposed to do. And also, the reality of protection is 99% of the time, nothing happens. So it's just an insurance policy for the 1%.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it was a great pleasure to have this conversation.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Definitely going to look you up, and I want to learn more. Before we close this off, this is such a attractive, luring lifestyle for people. And I meet a lot of people that are young, that are motivated, that want to do something with their lives, and they look around like, "Ed, like, what's your recommendation?" And usually I tell them, like, "Dude, go to school, do something else." I do have mixed feelings about my experiences and some of the aspects of what I had to do and what it cost me. Looking back on all this, was it worth it?
To be determined.
Good. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye.